Thank you for joining us today for this presentation on youth vaping prevention. My name is Ashley Flynn and I'm a student in Weber State's Doctor of Nursing Practice program. This is my doctoral project titled Preventing Vaping in Students Through Parental Education in a Northwest Utah Elementary School. As the U.S. Surgeon General has stated, the problem of youth vaping has risen to the status of a national epidemic. In other words, we are in a crisis, and it is imperative that we act quickly to stop the problem from spiraling further out of control. By viewing this presentation, you are arming yourself with knowledge, and with this information, you are becoming a vital part of the solution. The e-cigarette sector of the tobacco industry is evolving at a rapid pace with new products constantly entering the market. As policymakers scramble to rein in the issue, new regulations are being put in place at the local, state, and national levels. It can be tough to keep up with everything, and this is a common struggle when dealing with a crisis. We'll do our best to distill the latest and most important information for you in this presentation, but keep in mind that this information is current as of December of 2020. These are our objectives for the day. What are e-cigarettes? How did we get here? The effects of vaping and what can be done. So, what are e-cigarettes? Let's define e-cigarette. E-cigarettes are a battery-powered device that heats and disperses a liquid so that it can be inhaled into the lungs. We like to compare e-cigarettes to phones or computers. Whether it is an iPhone or an Android, a Mac or PC, they all essentially do the same thing and have the same parts, they just look different. The same applies to e-cigarettes. All e-cigarettes contain a battery, micropressor, atomizer, and cartridge or tank. There are many variations on the mechanism, but the basic process is the same. The micropressor senses a change in pressure when the user inhales on the end of the e-cigarette. The micropressor then instructs the atomizer to activate the heater and vaporize the liquid which the smoker inhales through the mouthpiece. The vapor is then drawn into the body in the same way as a regular cigarette. Vapor is defined as a substance that is diffused or suspended in the air, especially one normally liquid or solid. Think of the steam that comes from boiled water. That's what a lot of people believe comes out of an e-cigarette. In reality, is an aerosolized vapor. Aerosol is defined as a substance enclosed under pressure, and it is able to be released as a fine spray, typically by the means of a propellant gas. And you can think of a hairspray or a room spray. Although vaping is a slang term for an e-cigarette, it's a term that is meant to make e-cigarettes sound less harmful than they really are. Now that we have the basic information, let's redefine vaping with what we learned. Inhaling the aerosolized chemicals created through the heating of an e-liquid in an e-cigarette. Starting to sound a little bit less innocent, isn't it? Now that we know how e-cigarettes work, let's see if you can identify what an e-cigarette looks like. You see the following school supplies laying out on your child's desk. What you may not realize is that some of these supplies are actually e-cigarettes. Choose the ones that you think are e-cigarettes, and I'll give you a hint. There are 6 vaping devices in this picture. So I'll give you just a minute to look over those, and then I'm going to start clicking through them to see how many of them you got right. So these are the actual vaping devices. But don't worry if you didn't do so well. A lot of adults struggle with spotting e-cigarettes, especially because there are continually new devices and designs. Next, we're going to take a look at some of the different vaping devices and how e-cigarettes have evolved. E-cigarettes come in several different forms: disposable, rechargeable, tanks, and refillable. This chart shows the evolution of e-cigarettes. The first generation disposables often resemble the shape and/or look of traditional cigarettes, and they are intended to be used until the liquid runs out, at which point they are to be discarded. Second generation vape pens are pen-shaped devices that can have a small refillable tank and a battery that can be recharged. The third generation tanks are large e-cigarettes with a rechargeable battery and a large refillable cartridge. These are also called mods because you can break them open and modify some of the parts. Fourth generation e-cigarettes have a sleek, high-tech design with easily rechargeable batteries. The most popular in the e-cigarette epidemic is in this category. It's called Juul. Juul uses small disposable pods that contain the e-liquid, and it is then inserted into the larger Juul device. They can be easily confused for a USB drive, and they can even be charged on laptops or computers. They become so popular that they've spawned their own terminology, which is important as some students who use a Juul device might not consider themselves as vaping or using an e-cigarette, but as juuling. There's a lot of slang terminology that is only associated with Juul. The fifth generation is another line of disposable e-cigarettes. Since the flavor ban, which we will discuss later, a new sleek design of disposable e-cigarettes are on the rise in popularity. And they come in many flavors and often have a high nicotine concentration. This type of e-cigarette is currently not part of the flavor ban, and there are a variety of flavors available. The National Youth Tobacco Survey, which is administered by the CDC every year, says that about 20,000 students grades 6 through 12 are surveyed, and this year the survey was delivered between January and March of 2020. According to the survey, pre-filled pods or cartridges, as mentioned in Generation 4, were the most commonly used e-cigarette device among high school and middle school students. These were followed by disposables for high school students and third, tanks. For middle school students, the second most popular were tanks and third were disposables. There are more than 8,000 different flavors of e-juice. E-juice is the slang term for the liquid in an e-cigarette. Its formal name is e-liquid, and more often than not, it includes nicotine and flavoring chemicals. The use of flavors to mask the harshness of tobacco is a seductive and deceptive marketing tactic that has been used by the tobacco industry for decades, including products like menthol cigarettes and fruit-flavored cigars. But e-cigarette vapor lacks the harsh burn of traditional cigarettes or cigars, making the first puff much friendlier on the palate and easier for kids to take up the habit. According to the Journal of American Medical Association, 81% of kids who ever used tobacco products started with a flavored product. And among current e-cigarette users, 82.9% use a flavored product. Fruit was the most popular flavor for both middle and high school students. The FDA has taken some steps to mitigate the appeal to youth by prohibiting packaging that intentionally mimics food products. You can see some examples here. Pictured here is the popular kids juice box Treetop Apple Juice next to an e-liquid called Juice Box. The Very Very Slushy is another example of e-liquid packaging that has been banned. Although the FDA has implemented some restrictions on labeling requirements, they are still limited and not required on packaging, making it difficult for consumers to know what is contained in e-juice. In fact, some e-cigarettes marketed as containing 0% nicotine have been found to contain nicotine. But what is nicotine? Nicotine is a toxic liquid that is the chief active component of tobacco. It acts as a stimulant in small doses, but in larger amounts it blocks the action of nerve and muscle cells. Nicotine is also used in insecticides. An important note about nicotine is that it can be absorbed through the skin, so take caution when handling vaping devices. Beyond nicotine, any substance that can be transformed into a liquid can be used in an e-cigarette. To make vaping more fashionable, there have been many accessories created for vapors. Perhaps the most shocking is the emergence of clothing specifically designed to conceal vaping devices. The clothing contains stealth pockets, providing a discrete location for tobacco product systems. These are often used to deliver vapor discreetly through a hose woven in the hoodies and backpacks, and therefore can be used for vaping without raising attention of parents, teachers, or other adults. The FDA is concerned about the rising youth appeal and dramatic rise in youth use of vaping products. Any efforts to entice minors to use tobacco products are a concern to the FDA. So now that you understand a little bit about the current situation, we can ask ourselves, how did we get here? The chart that you see on the screen comes from the National Youth Tobacco Survey. It's administered every year by the CDC. About 20,000 students, grades 6 through 12, are surveyed each year about their relationship with tobacco. This year, the survey was delivered between January and March of 2020. We've had a steady increase in youth e-cigarette use from 2017 to 2019. During a 3-year span, we saw a 135% increase among high school students and a 218% increase among middle school students. But in 2020, the story has shifted slightly. 19.6% of high school students and 4.7% of middle school students report current use of e-cigarettes. Although this shows an overall decline in youth use, the frequent and daily use rates for both middle and high school students are still unacceptable. It's thought that this drop in 2020 may be due to a lack of association with peers due to the pandemic. And it will be interesting to see what happens in the coming years as we start to normalize again. Among current e-cigarette users, 38.9% of high school students and 20% of middle school students report using e-cigarettes on 20 or more of the past 30 days. Even more shocking is the 22.5% of high school users and 9.4% of middle school users reporting daily use. To feed a frequent or daily habit, young vaping teens have had to find ways to get their fix amid age restrictions and flavor bans. As we will discuss later, the current flavor ban only covers pre-filled pods or cartridges. This means that flavored, disposable e-cigarettes are still widely available. Evidence to ban the sale of all e-cigarettes continues to mount with the results of the 2020 National Youth Tobacco Survey. Consistent with 2019, pre-filled pods or cartridges were the most commonly used device in 2020. However, during 2019 through 2020, disposable e-cigarette use increased approximately 1,000% among high school current e-cigarette users and approximately 400% among middle school current e-cigarette users. Although these data reflect a decline in current e-cigarette use since 2019, there is still an alarming 3.6 million U.S. youth that report using e-cigarettes in 2020, and among current users, more than 8 in 10 report using flavored e-cigarettes. And here's a statistic that really scares the public health community. Despite an overall decrease in youth using traditional cigarettes, the data from the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey actually showed an increase in overall use of tobacco. A study by the University of Pittsburgh found that in the study, 47.7% of those who used e-cigarettes at baseline began smoking cigarettes within 18 months, compared to just 10.2% of non-e-cigarette users. Scientific models showed that e-cigarette use made it 6.8 times more likely that an individual would begin smoking cigarettes within 18 months. The alarming rates at which youth are beginning to vape is undermining the progress that has been made toward reducing overall tobacco use. The 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey data showed that among youth who currently use tobacco, about 1 in 3 report using 2 or more tobacco products in the past 30 days. E-cigarettes may turn out to be an off-ramp for some older long-time smokers, but they're already an absolutely huge on-ramp for new young smokers. Big Tobacco used the term replacement smokers in the 80s to refer to young people they needed to draw into tobacco use in order to replace their dying customers. Perhaps this link between vaping and smoking pulls back the veil on tobacco industry's motives behind multi-billion-dollar investments in e-cigarette companies, like the $12.8 billion investment by Atria in Juul in 2018. It's pretty clear that the new replacement smokers for big tobacco are today's young vaping teens. We have seen the high rates at which young people vape, but why do they start? The National Institute on Drug Abuse, or NIDA, conducts a survey each year called Monitoring the Future. This survey is distributed to roughly 12,000 students across the country every year and asks them about various risk behaviors, tobacco and e-cigarette use being one of those. The 2019 Monitoring the Future survey results found the top 3 reasons why teens vape include: number 1, to experiment or to see what it's like; number 2, because it tastes good; number 3 was tied with to have a good time with my friends and to relax or relieve tension. It's important to note that teens who reported to relax or relieve tension increased by more than 1/3 compared to 2018. So why has there been this rapid and dramatic increase in youth use? This figure from the National Institute of Health shows the knowledge gap that students have about e-juice ingredients. What we see is not just that 13.7% of teens don't know what's in their e-cigarette, but 66% believe it's just flavoring. As we learned earlier, there are many different chemicals in e-cigarette vapor, and more often than not, there is nicotine. According to the CDC, 99% of e-cigarettes sold in 2015 contained nicotine. This lack of knowledge about e-cigarettes makes youth more susceptible to the mistruths they may encounter online or hear from their peers. Another major contributor to the increase is pervasive marketing and advertising. According to the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey, 7 in 10 kids are regularly exposed to e-cigarette advertisements. The chart on the screen shows a breakdown of where students are being exposed to these ads. It is no surprise that youth reported seeing e-cigarette advertisements in retail stores, 58.4%. For years, the tobacco industry has marketed their products in retail stores or gas stations. Tobacco prevention and control advocates worked to pass laws that tobacco advertisements had to be placed at a certain height to reduce exposure to advertising to the youth. Product placement laws have also been passed, including tobacco products to be behind the counter, not for the individual sell, and not placed next to youth appealing sales like candy. The e-cigarette industry has used the same marketing tactics as the tobacco industry once did. Next highest rate of exposure was via the internet at 44.6%, followed by TV, streaming services, or movies at 26.2%, and 34.8% exposed via newspapers or magazines. It's important to teach kids to recognize e-cigarette ads, which can be stealthy and subtle in social media, so they can understand when they are being sold something. Think about your social media use or your children's use. We can control who we follow and who follows us, but we can't control the advertising that pops up. We also need to think about the influencers and celebrities that might use these products and post about them. For years, the tobacco industry has marketed their products in retail stores and gas stations. Tobacco prevention and control advocates worked to pass laws that tobacco advertisements had to be placed at a certain height to reduce exposure to advertising to youth. Now the e-cigarette industry is using the same advertising techniques. Next time you're at a convenience store, take a note of the tobacco and e-cigarette advertisements and where they are placed. Researchers found that in their early marketing campaigns, Juul clearly targeted young audiences, crafting their brand and advertising around strategies that were appealing to teenagers. Dr. Robert Jackler, a tobacco advertising expert, states, Juul ads are filled with attractive youth models socializing and flirtatiously sharing the flash drive-shaped device, displaying behavior like dancing to club-like music and clothing styles more characteristic of teens than mature adults. One major difference that set Juul apart from other companies was their strong social media presence, utilizing hashtags and peer-to-peer promotions through activities like Juul Challenges, which were stunts or activities devised by social media influencers that encouraged people to take and post pictures or videos of themselves doing various things with their Juul devices. We discussed Juul's rapid rise in popularity due to their social media presence. Other brands market these products on social media channels as well. Similar to the activity we did at the beginning of the presentation, some companies create a spot the vape technique to show users how easy the device is to conceal, like the vape sitting next to the makeup on the screen. In addition to appealing to youth, one of the newest, most disturbing marketing tactics is exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic. Some e-cigarette companies are offering free masks with purchase. Let's start by addressing a short-term effect that can have a long-term consequence: addiction. We are all born with a potential for addiction, and it can manifest in different ways: alcohol, nicotine, social media, exercise, caffeine, or chocolate. So what's unhealthy about e-cigarettes? Using nicotine in adolescence can harm the parts of the brain that control attention, learning, mood, and impulse control. Since the human brain continues to develop until about the age of 25, we need to prevent youth now from experiencing with vaping and other nicotine products as we are much less likely to be addicted if we do pick up a cigarette or nicotine product after the age of 25. To understand how this works, we need to go over a little biology. Each time a new memory is created or a new skill is learned, stronger connections or synapses are built between brain cells. Young people's brains build synapses faster than adult brains. Nicotine changes the way these synapses are formed, interfering with the brain's sensitive pleasure and rewards feedback loop. Because of this, nicotine in adolescence may also increase risk for future addiction to other drugs. It's important to note that until recently, Juul was the leader in the vaping market with incredibly high nicotine concentration at 5% in one pod. So what does that mean? The amount of nicotine in a single Juul pod and some disposables is equal to the amount of nicotine found in an entire pack of cigarettes and includes the same number of puffs, which is about 200. Some kids are developing nicotine habits equivalent to 2 pack-a-day smokers. Now, other e-cigarette brands are following suit, including mini disposable e-cigarettes that often come in many flavors and are not part of the flavor ban. The vapor that is produced and inhaled when using an e-cigarette is not harmless. In fact, it can contain many harmful ingredients. While e-cigarette vapor generally contains fewer harmful chemicals than smoke from burned tobacco, it is important to keep in mind the difference between less harm and harmless. Jumping out of a third-story window will cause less harm than jumping out of the 10th floor, but neither is harmless. E-cigarette juice, or e-juice, is the liquid that is heated to become the inhaled vapor. This is the same with the Juul devices and disposables. The e-juice may contain cancer-causing chemicals, heavy metals such as nickel, tin, and lead, and almost always contains the addictive tobacco-derived compound nicotine. Research has found that nicotine content and concentration in different vaping devices may vary. As we learned earlier, e-cigarettes produce what is considered an aerosolized vapor that consists of liquid particles and gaseous chemicals. Some of the ingredients in e-cigarette aerosol could be physically harmful to the lungs in the long term. For example, some e-cigarette flavorings have been deemed safe to eat, but not safe to inhale. It is difficult for consumers to know what e-cigarette products contain because, as we discussed earlier, labeling requirements are limited and not required on the package. For example, some e-cigarettes marketed as containing 0% nicotine have been found to contain nicotine. Before COVID-19, there was a great alarm and concern over vaping-associated lung illness. In early April 2019, the FDA issued an announcement regarding e-cigarettes, seizures, and lung disease. We have reports indicating that some people who use e-cigarettes, especially youth and young adults, are experiencing seizures following their use. Since then, the CDC issued the following statement. While it appears that vitamin E acetate is associated with lung injury associated with the use of e-cigarettes, vaping, or products, there are many different substances and product sources that are being investigated, and there may be more than one cause. Between April 2019 and February 2020, there were 2,807 cases reported in all 50 states and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and 68 deaths and in 29 states and DC. Despite the lack of new cases being reported since February 2020 due to the outbreak of the coronavirus, CDC still advises the following regardless. E-cigarette or vaping products should never be used by youth, young adults, or women who are pregnant. Adults who do not currently use tobacco products should not start using e-cigarettes or vaping products. There is no safe tobacco product. All tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, carry a risk. Whether or not this correlation ends up being proven, it begs the question, what other risks might there be? And can this happen again? There is very little we know about the long-term effects of e-cigarettes. So therefore, yes, it could happen again. Unfortunately, this generation of kids have become the guinea pigs. Lung injury associated with the use of e-cigarettes, vaping, or products presents like pneumonia and/or COVID. So it's important that if you know anyone experiences these symptoms for a prolonged period of time, which is more than a few days, that a physician is consulted and any e-cigarette use, nicotine or THC related, is disclosed. Additionally, an August 2020 study from Stanford University found that those who vape are 5 times as likely to contract COVID-19 as those who do not. To compound this, if you vape and smoke, you are 7 times as likely to contract COVID-19. Now that you know some facts about e-cigarettes, how vaping grew to be an epidemic among our youth, what we know about long-term and short-term effects of vaping, let's look at what you can do as parents, community partners, and school teachers or advisors and leaders. We have learned that as someone uses a nicotine product, the chemical is absorbed into their system and mood and pleasure centers are aroused. The tolerance and physical dependence for the substance increases as use continues. Going without nicotine can produce withdrawal symptoms as well as a craving for more nicotine. The cycle continues to repeat. As we continue to learn about vaping and nicotine addiction, there are signs to look for to identify if your child or student is vaping. If your child or student is normally calm and very easygoing, but now they seem very anxious or irritable, is it just the teenage years or could the child be vaping? Often someone who is dependent on nicotine has a difficulty concentrating. If a student is vaping and they are having this nicotine withdrawal in class, they may not be paying attention to the teacher, but rather thinking of when they can get their next nicotine fix on their vaping device. Other symptoms include changes in eating patterns, which can result in weight gain or loss, mouth sores or irritation around the mouth from being exposed to the chemicals in the vapor, and an increase in thirst because some of the chemicals found in e-liquid can cause dry mouth. Although it's more difficult to recognize vaping based on the odor than it is to recognize the odor of conventional cigarettes, your child may have an interest in burning candles or incense because they're trying to hide the flavor from their e-cigarette, which is normally a sweet flavor. The same goes for a sudden interest in using perfume or cologne. Another one is a missing phone charger because that can be used to charge a lot of e-cigarette devices. We want to reinforce that none of these signs are a surefire signal that your student or child is vaping. Rather, they are a path to start a conversation with your child. So how do you talk to your kids about vaping? Before you start the conversation, you should know the facts. You have already started this process by attending this training. When you start the conversation, do not start with, "We need to talk." No one likes to hear that. Our immediate thought is, "Oh no, what did I do wrong?" Instead, bring up a recent event or a news story about vaping, or maybe something you learned in this presentation. Recently, there was the first teenager of 17 who died with vaping-related complications. You could talk about that. It's a safe way to start the conversation without accusing your child of vaping. Ask for support from your healthcare provider and other trusted adults. Answer their questions, and if there's something you don't know, let them know that it's a good question and that you will find out the answer. This is not a one and done conversation. Keep the conversation going, as this is an ongoing emerging health crisis among our youth population. Remind and repeat. We have outlined a few cessation resources available for young people to quit vaping. Evidence shows that children who are expected to check in with their parents about their free time were half as likely to try tobacco products. The simple questions are the good ones. Where, who, when can have a big effect on their decisions, including whether or not they try e-cigarettes. A few rules about their free time can prevent opportunities for risky behavior. Know where they are going, with who, and when they will be back. Keep them busy by enrolling them in after-school activities they enjoy. Know their teachers and coaches and be sure to attend the events they participate in. Make connections with their friends' parents and set rules regarding adult supervision and curfews. Checking in with your child decreases opportunities to make risky choices about tobacco products and alerts you to possible problems. It's also helpful to know what you're up against. As you begin the conversation with your child, it's important to remember 4 key points: what you expect, why it's important, how to respond, and consequences. What you expect, it is helpful to start the conversation with questions and hear your child's thoughts and experiences. Why it's important. Remember why young people don't think too much about long-term health consequences like cancer or heart attacks. Instead, you should focus on the immediate social consequences like getting in trouble. How to respond. Your child may have been invited to smoke or vape and didn't know what to do. Ask open-ended questions and make it clear that you are listening. These are great to practice with your child as they are learning them in their education in the school system. If they do it, you may need to take a few minutes to yourself before talking with your child. Remember to convey that you love them but disapprove of the behavior. Consequences need to be small but applied consistently. Long-term, large consequences or threats do not work and are hard to enforce. If your child is caught vaping multiple times, it may be time to treat the addiction. In January of 2020, the president banned all flavored pre-filled pods except menthol and tobacco flavors. The FDA also finalized an enforcement policy to punish any retailers caught selling unauthorized flavors of cartridge-based e-cigarettes. While this is a significant step forward, it's important to note that the new ban only includes closed pre-filled pods. Like Juul cartridges, it does not cover disposable e-cigarettes. Most of the flavors we learned about earlier come in the form of e-liquid, and they are still available in thousands of youth-friendly flavors. Although there have been recent action by the FDA to remove disposable e-cigarettes and youth-appealing e-liquids from the market for not having required authorization, flavors are still allowed and widely available on the market, and experts are concerned that kids will shift from brands like Juul to these inexpensive disposable flavored products. Continued support is needed to restrict youth access to nicotine products. For example, On December 20th, 2019, the President signed legislation to raise the minimum age of sale of tobacco products from 18 to 21 years nationwide. This will play an important role in cutting off youth access to tobacco products through older friends, as the age gap now extends well beyond high school age. However, students are still able to get their hands on e-cigarettes through online platforms when they use a fake birthday, and several students report obtaining e-cigarette supplies through their friends. There are many steps you can take to reduce the number of teenage e-cigarette users. Here we provided a few suggestions of how you can get involved in your community. Don't be afraid to talk to other parents. This could be when you drop your kids off, when you're having lunch with a friend, or when you run into a neighbor. You don't have to be an expert in e-cigarettes to open the conversation. Start by asking if they've heard about e-cigarettes or had any experience with e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes are still new in schools, and schools are working out how to address the problem. You could write an email or call the principal at your child's school and ask for vaping to be added to the tobacco and alcohol section of the school code of conduct. You may also recommend implementation of the Catch My Breath program. Another way to engage the school and parents is to call your local parent-teacher association and find out if they would like more information on e-cigarettes. Finally, an e-cigarette policy is still evolving. While Tobacco 21 and the limited flavor ban are positive steps, there's still plenty of work to be done. Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids and PAVE, or Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes, can keep you up to date with information on legislation being considered at the local, state, and federal levels and provide you with opportunities to take action. Catch My Breath is a nicotine prevention program that has been proven effective at reducing the likelihood that students will experiment with vaping. The program explains health behaviors and that they are products of personal, social, and environmental factors. In addition to building knowledge, Catch My Breath disrupts normative beliefs, such as the notion that everybody is doing it, because most kids are not. Students develop skills to help them resist peer pressure and see through advertising and misinformation that perpetuates online and from their peers. As a whole, the program creates favorable attitudes and beliefs about not using e-cigarettes. In January of 2020, Catch My Breath demonstrated effectiveness in a peer-reviewed study, making it the first evidence-based youth vaping prevention program. Since the program began broader dissemination efforts with support from CVS Health, it is free and has been adopted by schools across all 50 states, and it has already reached more than 1.4 million students thanks to a diverse community of support that includes private foundations, local departments of health, state education agencies, and school districts. By adopting the program at your school, you will be joining more than 4,000 other middle and high schools that have decided to fight back against the rising youth e-cigarette epidemic. The program is available for elementary, middle, and high schools. It consists of 4 lessons that each take between 35 and 40 minutes in the classroom. The lessons are a combination of teacher presentations and peer-facilitated small group discussions and projects. This slide shows some feedback from students who have gone through our middle school program. Thank you for participating in this presentation.